In art history. This one specializes in cultural images of death. His book, The Empire of the Dead, named by London Evening Standard as one of the 10 best of 2011. He's here to talk to us about Sicilian Sex Ghosts. Yeah! Pretty exciting, right?
Yeah.
If you feel something poking into your backside, don't worry. This place used to be Cuffs. It's probably the ghost of Rob Halford getting his jollies. What? Oh, he's not dead yet. Well, perhaps his ghost is just premature. She got it. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Koudounaris. Did you like the Rob Halford thing? Do you want a Rob Halford knock joke?
I do.
I don't have two. I only wrote one. All right. How about a Judas Priest knock joke? Are you ready for that? Knock.
Rob Halford.
Rob, you of your anal virginity. I'm sorry. Hello. That's quite an accent you have. What part of the country are you from?
None.
I've been there. None, Alaska. All right. Well, let me say to start with that this is. I'm really excited about this talk tonight because this is the first time that I've gotten to talk about the sex ghosts in Palermo with someone from Palermo in the audience. So we can assume that anything I'm going to talk about tonight has happened to her. And as our host has pointed out, I wrote a book last year that was published last year that I had spent about 5 years working on. And in the process of working on that book, I visited about 100 sites decorated with human bone and human remains. And in the process, over a 5-year period, I also picked up a lot of corollary material, just folklore about haunted things and macabre things, because pretty much any site that's covered in human remains is going to be considered haunted by someone. And the finest macabre site that I've ever visited are the Palermo Catacombs in Sicily. That's the more properly called the crypt underneath the monastery of Santa Maria della Pace in Palermo, Sicily. In 1599, the Capuchin monks in Palermo had started mummifying their own brothers. It started with a brother by the name of Silvestro Gubbio. This is an old album print. This place has looked about the way it does now for several hundred years. They started mummifying their own brethren, and over time, they started mummifying lay people as well. It became a kind of mark of prestige in Palermo culture to have the monks prepare your body. It's a very Norman Bates society. When you die, if you really care about your mother or your brother, when someone dies, if you really care about that person, you'd send them to the monks to be mummified and then displayed underneath this monastery. It was just a mark of sophistication, a mark of an upper-class person. It was a sign of distinction to be displayed with these dead monks. And eventually an entire catacomb system developed. It is, as I said, it's probably the finest macabre site I have ever seen. And in the process of constructing this wonderful macabre masterpiece, they also constructed considered one of the most haunted sites in the world. There are an incalculable number of mummies down here. Aside from the ones that are on display, there are some others that they let me see which didn't quite work out, as they put it. And so, I mean, those are there as well, hidden in the back. So it's just got this world of folklore. And everything in Palermo and everything in Sicily in general seems to revolve around two things, sex and death. So it's not that surprising that this, one of the world's most haunted places, has a number of ghosts that are considered especially lascivious. In Palermo, after you die, it's kind of de rigueur to go out and try to rape or sodomize someone, apparently. And I'll talk about a few of these today. Those are at least a dozen ghosts who are thought to reside in the Palermo Catacombs who have performed some kind of lascivious sexual act against someone. No, because a succubus is a demon, and this is something entirely different. We'll try to categorize it as we go, maybe, but it's not quite that. Anyway, I've given versions of this talk a couple times. I change it around each time because there are several of these sex ghosts. You know, in Palermo they just call them ghosts. I'm the one who calls them sex ghosts because, as I said, in Palermo everything revolves around sex and death anyway. So if you're dead, you should be having sex with someone. I call them sex ghosts. In Italian, they're just fantasmi or whatever they call a ghost. And a couple of these I've talked about in other talks. Those of you who have been to other talks I've given on this topic might remember El Postino, or the postman. He was thought legal action was actually brought against the monastery in the early 20th century because it was said that he had been stealing women's underwear, and these underwear were found in his niche behind the mummy. It was thought that the ghost of this mummy would leave the monastery, go out at night, steal underpants, and bring them back here, and eventually legal charges were an injunction was brought against this ghost, and the monastery threatened his mummy with removal and burial, and he eventually stopped. There was another one they called L'Asino. If you'd been to other talks I've done on this, you might remember him. He was a particularly nefarious ghost. L'Asino, or the donkey, was a genital mutilating ghost. He was especially famed for his actions against a horse and a horse owner. He had cut off the horse's penis and then crushed the genitals of the horse owner, which gave rise to a very curious colloquialism in Palermo in the late 19th century. There was this old phrase, proteggere il pene dell'asino, or protect the penis from the ass. And that's what it translates to in English. I don't know that the double entendre quite works as well in Italian, but protect the penis from l'asino, from the ass, and take that as you will. Anyway, of these so-called sex ghosts, I've picked out a handful for you. I picked out 4 of them tonight to detail in a little bit greater fashion. The first one I'd like to talk about, and I haven't talked about him in any prior talks, and when I was going through my notes I wondered why I hadn't, because he's so spectacular. He's called Il Masturbatore, and the translation's pretty obvious, the masturbator. The very strange story behind him and his death. Now, he was a Capuchin friar, so he was a monk in this monastery. He lived at this monastery. He was very elderly, and he was known for his pious behavior, as upstanding a monk as you could possibly have, until they said the devil got into him one night, right? They always blame the devil for what we do. The devil forced him to masturbate for the first time at the age of 80. He'd never done it before, obviously. So the devil got into him one night, and he started to masturbate. The excitement, apparently, of his first orgasm was too much for his octogenarian heart to take, and he died. He had a heart attack when he ejaculated, and that they say that explains the facial expression. They say that he was found, this is what they said, this is the monastery lore, that he was found dead in his cell with his penis in his hand and this expression on his face. They call it an expression of shock. Well, I don't know if it's shock. It's something. Anyway.
Shock out.
Well, it's funny you say that, because the next slide, it's interesting because it's actually one of the first historically documented cases of an autoerotic fatality, if it's true. Anyway, so he masturbated himself to death at the age of 80, this monk, and he became a kind of patron saint against the evils of masturbation. They would tell boys who were chronic masturbators, don't do it because Il Masturbatore is going to come and get you. You know, Masturbatore, the ghost of the masturbator. You're going to wind up like him. And so he was kind of a threat against boys who masturbated too much. They'd warn him that they would meet a similar fate with that lovely smile on their face. Anyway, his most famous apparition, and it's a wonderful story. As I said, when I was going through my notes, I wondered why I hadn't discussed this one before, because it's magnificent. In the late 19th century, there was a boy who was a chronic masturbator, and he just didn't believe it. Il Masturbatore doesn't exist. There's no ghost. This guy didn't masturbate himself to death. And he decided to test the legend, because he believed it was just a tall tale. So he began pleasuring himself, he began masturbating, and daring Il Masturbatore to stop him. Come on, you make me stop, buddy. Come on, Il Masturbatore. Il Masturbatore did not appear. The next day, he did it again. he jacked off and told Il Masturbatore to just try to stop him, and he didn't appear. And this kid, with his dirty pictures and this smile on his face, he thought he was really getting away with something, right? Il Masturbatore doesn't exist until the third day, when he tried it again. And he started jacking off, and as he was just about to ejaculate, he heard a voice from behind him say, "Here, let me help you with that." And a bony hand, a ghostly bony hand, "Here, let me help you with that." And a bony ghostly hand reached around from behind him and grabbed his penis. Now he didn't help him jack off. He pulled the boy by the penis. He grabbed him by the penis and dragged him from his house. With his pants down, he dragged him by the penis from his house and started dragging him through the streets. The Carabinieri, who are the Italian police, the riflemen, the carbine, the rifle guys, the carbine carriers, the Carabinieri were called, and they started firing on the ghost, but of course it will do no good. The bullets just passed through his body, and he dragged this kid by the penis all the way to the monastery, where he dumped him on the floor, and he said a wonderful thing. At the monastery, the ghost finally spoke to the boy again. He dumped him on the floor and told him, "Now that the whole neighborhood has seen you, maybe you will have some shame, since you apparently had none before." So you can say that to anybody, it's a wonderful thing. Say that to the guy at the grocery store. Anyway, so the ghost drags him by the penis across the neighborhood, dumps him on the floor, and says, "Now that the whole neighborhood has seen you, maybe you will have some shame, since you apparently had none before." And then he told him one more thing. He says, "You will not be needing this anymore." And he grabbed his penis with an ice-cold, ghostly, iron-fisted grip. And he grabbed his penis as hard as possible, so hard that the boy passed out and his testes were shattered. He wound up infertile for life. He was rendered sterile by the ghost's grip, and he was passed out on the floor of the monastery. It's gotta hurt, it really does, and it's gotta be a little bit shameful, so the point had been proved. Anyway, you would wonder what happened to the boy, and it's a curious thing. The boy himself eventually took ecclesiastic orders. The boy himself became a priest and specialized in preaching against the evils of masturbation. So you see, a ghost can act as a detriment to aberrant behavior, at least in Palermo. The second one I'd like to talk to you about, and this is one of my favorites. I love him. His name is Il Pervertito Medico, or in English we might call him the dirty doctor, or the perverted doctor. That's what they used to call him in Sicily, the ghost of the dirty doctor, the pervert doctor. And his story starts with a woman, not this woman, but in old Sicilian women kind of look like. They don't always hold the grapes. It's not a bacchanal, but something like this. Anyway, in the late 19th century, there was an elderly woman who had grown up in Palermo, and she'd returned to Sicily after spending about 20 years working in the vineyards in Campania near Salerno. She returns home to retire. Unfortunately, she had developed some kind of unusual vaginal discharge, and she had to go see a gynecologist. Now, she had been out of the city for about 20 years, and she remembered when she was a young girl, there was a gynecologist that she had seen. So she went to his office. She arrived at the office to seek out this gynecologist, but there was another doctor entirely, not the one she had seen 20 years earlier. And this doctor told her, "Well, the gynecologist you had seen has retired, but I took over his practice, so I'm the gynecologist here, and I can go ahead and see you. I can take care of you and treat you." So he strapped her into a harness, her legs into a harness, but then he started to take certain liberties with the old lady, certain liberties that she did not appreciate. She gave a police report on this, and a police report exists. I mean, make of it what you will. The police report exists, whether it was fabricated or not. The police report exists. And she told the police that this is the quote from the report, "He attempted to eat on my pubic hair like a cow chews the grass. He did not perform the act," meaning cunnilingus, "but he kept eating the hair. I screamed at him to stop, but he chewed it like a cow chews the cud." See, that's a very rural interpretation, I guess, of what he's doing. She had lived on a vineyard for a long time. So he was chewing her pubic hair like a cow chews the cud. Anyway, it should have been a pretty simple matter to bring Il Masturbatore to justice, right? The police knew where the office was. They had a full description from the lady, and they went down there. The problem was, she breaks free from the restraints. She runs away, And she tells the police about this. They go down to the office. The problem was, when they arrived at the office, they realized there was something amiss with the lady's story. The problem was that the story was essentially true about the practice changing hands, but in reality, the practice had changed hands to a doctor who had died about 5 years before, and that was the man that she had described, a doctor who had been dead for about 5 years. Well, when the police explained what had happened to the people at the gynecologist's office, they found something else amiss and something else curious. The man that the woman had described as the doctor, the so-called doctor who had been chewing on her pubic hair, in fact exactly matched the description of the doctor who had run the practice but died. His name was Dr. Remigio Sigamundo. See, the girl from Palermo was like, wait, that was my gynecologist too, what the hell? Anyway, Dr. Remigio was he?
Yes!
Yeah, maybe she's left. She's like, I can't hear about this. This is my hometown. Anyway, so she had described exactly, to a T, a man who had sexually molested her but had been a doctor who had died 5 years before. The police said to her, would you be able to identify this man if we brought him to you? Would you be able to recognize him? And she said, yeah, I absolutely can recognize him. So they brought her down to the catacombs and they placed her in front of the mummy. And she ran screaming that this was most certainly her molester and he was most certainly alive and he was certainly not dead. And she refused to go back down there. Well, it was thought that she was absolutely delusional, but over the next decade, a series of similar sexual assaults occurred, all in the vicinity of this former gynecologist's office. And in every case, completely unrelated, women reported the molester to look exactly like this man, Dr. Sigamundo. Now, the police had absolutely no way to stop these assaults, but there was a greater power than the police who was about to come in the picture, the dead doctor's widow. The dead doctor's widow heard about this, and she went to the police, and she told the police, you know, it's true. My husband was a bad man, and he was a philanderer, and these are the kinds of things that he would do, and I am the one who can stop him. I can stop this behavior. So they let her go down to the monastery and into the catacombs, and she told the police, I need some time alone with him. I have some words for my husband. Now, no one knows what was said between the widow and the mummy, but not another sexual assault was ever reported. So, as I said, there is a higher power than the police and the courts of law, the widow. Speaking of widowed people, the third sex ghost, and this is a story that is so absolutely weird to this day, it still kind of boggles my mind, but they call her La Sposa, the bride. She's the most idiosyncratic of all the ghosts. They have a special section in the Palermo Catacombs for girls who die with their virginity intact. It's called the Chapel of the Virgins, and they keep it under lock and key. Even to this day, they're kept under lock and key because that's Palermo. You know, even when they're dead, don't let the men near them to keep their virginity, because dying with their virginity intact in Palermo is, you know, it's apparently a Herculean feat. They call her the bride, and she's in the Chapel of the Virgins, but she actually was never married, even though they call her the bride. It's kind of nickname they gave her, and the reason that she's in the Chapel of the Virgins is she was never married and the marriage was never consecrated. They call her the bride because she was supposed to get married, but she was jilted. Her husband-to-be was a gigolo. He ran off with another woman right before their wedding, and according to her family, she had died of a broken heart. So this young girl dies as a virgin. She was supposed to be married. She's jilted on the altar and dies of a broken heart. And it is said because of that, because of her near miss with true love, she develops this romantic attraction for certain male tourists. And male tourists are advised not to look upon her because she might fall in love with them and she might follow them home. The thing about her, and the reason she's so idiosyncratic, is that there are several cases of her appearing to tourists and propositioning them, falling in love with them, but it's always a certain category of tourists. She only likes people from a certain country. Yeah, she only goes for Germans. And so in every case where she has attacked a tourist or she has been attracted to a tourist or propositioned them, it's always been a German. Anyway, and I don't know, it's an obvious question, maybe that's it, maybe it's the Hitler fixation, but anyway, local folklorists have cited over a dozen known cases of the ghost called La Sposa haunting German tourists who have visited her in the catacombs. Always young men, always handsome young men. If you're not a handsome young man, it's okay, but if you are, give her a bit of a berth. And especially if you're German. And the most famous case of her haunting a tourist, it's really the most emphatic of all the ghost stories in Palermo, involved a certain German guy. Now, what she usually does is she appears in their dreams and she kind of offers her hand in love, or, appears in their hotel and attempts to seduce them. And often what happens is, the German is there with his girlfriend or his wife, and problems then emerge, and that's when she'll attack them or do something violent. She doesn't like the Fraulein, she's not into threes of crowd. So she finds out there's a woman, then trouble emerges. So this is her basic pattern, and this is kind of her nun pattern. She appears to a German tourist, propositions him, turns out he's there with his girlfriend, and then something weird happens. And the case I was going to talk about involved a certain man from Hamburg. I don't have a picture of a man from Hamburg, but if you've been to Hamburg, this is not that far off, and so I've been using this one because I swear, there's a reason that they named the hamburger after the city of Hamburg, because there's a certain facial type. Anyway, so he presumably looked something like this in the 1970s. A tourist arrived with his fiancée from Hamburg. They were on their honeymoon. They were doing a tour of Italy, and they had gone down to Palermo. Their honeymoon turned a little bit sour. See, they're going to get her right now. She's after a German tourist in Silver Lake. Anyway, the German tourist from Hamburg, this man, this hamburger, had stopped to take a photo. Well, that's the name of someone from Hamburg, is hamburgers. He had stopped to take a photo of her, and as maybe a kind of precursor of things to come, as he was taking a photo of her, her skeleton had actually fallen over on him, and he was kind of shaken up and scared, and he left the catacombs at that point and went back to the hotel, but she followed him. She appeared to him in a dream and asked him to please return to the catacombs. So this skeleton falls over on this young German tourist and then appears to him in his dream, asking him to come back, and he says absolutely not. He will never go back to the catacombs again. He's had enough of this ghost. Then she appears to him in his shower. So he's taking a shower, and he said he had felt a presence in the shower, and he turned around. There was this shimmering image of this skeletal corpse bride behind him trying to touch him, and he ran out of the shower. She appeared to him several more times until she realized, they said she has a pattern, she realized he was there with his fiancée, that he was newlywed, and then things got very bad one night. She appeared in the hotel room and attacked the woman. A cat fight broke out. Now what she did, and this is what they all testified to, because this is what the hotel staff said happened as well. She grabbed his fiancée by the hair and tossed her down the stairs, breaking several of her bones, both her legs, and leaving her in traction. So she's in traction. What they should do is get out of Palermo, but she's in traction in a hospital, so they couldn't leave, so they had to try to ride it out. The ghost started appearing to the guy now that the fiancé's in the hospital and out of the way. So they consulted a priest, and the priest says, I can perform an exorcism on the hotel room and get rid of this ghost. I'm going to take care of this. So this Catholic priest comes in to perform an exorcism, and things did not go well. What happened was the hotel room caught on fire. That's what I mean by not going well. So the hotel room catches on fire, and now things are really, really bad. The authorities decided, we got to just get them out of Palermo and away from this ghost, which makes a certain amount of sense. They sent them to Messina, which is over on the tip of Sicily. They sent the woman to a hospital there, and they sent the man to a hotel there, and he waited for his fiancée to recover before they moved on. The hotel staff reported that he was so terrified that he could not sleep at night, but the ghost did not follow him there, although I do have a final story. Perhaps the most famous story of all the ghosts in the Palermo Catacombs. I do have a final story of a ghost who does follow people, and she follows them quite maliciously. But to finish up on La Sposa, an interesting thing, for some years afterward, they actually put a sign at the entrance of the Palermo Catacombs advising tourists who come in to not stop in front of the mummy of the one they call La Sposa, because, she might haunt you and terrorize you and break both of your legs. But they eventually removed that sign because they felt that it had kind of a bad effect on ticket sales. You go to the gate of an attraction and there's a sign up telling you that some supernatural force is going to break both your legs and pull your hair at night. You're probably not going to go, so they eventually removed the sign, but the legend persists. Anyway, the final ghost I'd like to talk about is a ghost called La Vedova, or the widow. She was not actually a widow. As I said, this is probably the most famous ghost story from Palermo, and it's also the dirtiest. She was not actually a widow during life, but they called her that after her death due to certain facts and a way she had been abused by her husband at the time. Now, her husband, the man who abused her and who caused her death, was a local circus strongman by the name of Garibaldi. And as I said, this is a very sad and sordid tale. The widow, the ghost they know of as La Vedova, was born into a prominent family in Palermo, which at the time, early 20th century, had a very, very hierarchical social structure, and classes did not mingle. And she was born into a prominent, wealthy family who had arranged a marriage for her with a prominent family, the son of a prominent family from Naples. But what they did not know is that their daughter, who was only 15 years old, had fallen madly in love with this carnival performer, this strongman by the name of Garibaldi. She'd fallen madly in love with this guy, and in fact had already given her virginity to this older man. Because she absolutely felt that, her plus Garibaldi was going to equal true love. She was absolutely infatuated with this circus performer. She finally told her family, she said, I'm not going to marry the guy from Naples. I am in love with the circus performer Garibaldi, and in fact I've already given my virginity to him. Now in Palermo at the time, this was tantamount to the worst embarrassment, the worst humiliation your family could suffer, to have your young daughter refuse marriage to someone in a good family and shack up with a circus performer. I mean, that was absolutely humiliating to the family. And they wound up disowning her. They cast her out. They're like, well, no, you're no longer part of our family. You want to be with Garibaldi? Go to Garibaldi. That's up to you. So she went to Garibaldi. She was 15 and Garibaldi was 49. She told him, I love you. I've been cast out of my family, but I don't care because I want us to be married and I want us to agree. I want to be with you forever because I love you madly. Garibaldi agreed to marry the 15-year-old girl. Now, in fact, here's a big surprise. His only interest in her was sexual. He was 49 and she was 15. He didn't really love her, imagine. And it turned out that it was an increasingly deviant sexuality. Remember, he was a circus performer, and he performed with certain members of the circus, including animals and midgets. So while she thought that her plus Garibaldi equaled true love, for Garibaldi, what it equaled was this kind of sideshow sexuality of forcing her to have sex with midgets and with animals, circus animals. And anyway, it's a sad story. I mean, I know we're all enjoying it greatly. This woman's defamation at the hands of these animals. Yeah, I mean, she probably had to have sex with whatever this is, this dog toy right here as well. Anyway, so Garibaldi founded his own private sideshow, his own private circus sideshow, starring his young wife. They would do private shows. For a wealthy clientele of her, forcing her to have sex with midgets and to have sex with animals. And he was racking up quite a bit of money by forcing his wife to do this for this, as I said, small but wealthy clientele who was willing to pay a premium price to watch these shows. She was found dead 3 years later. She died at the age of 18. She was found dumped in an alley of severe hemorrhaging of her internal organs, and it was suspected that the injuries occurred after Garibaldi forced her to have sex with a horse during one of these shows. So she was bludgeoned to death by the penis of a horse and left for dead in an alley. As I said, it's a sad story. There's a sadness in that, I suppose. Not for Garibaldi at will, or not for the horse, but certainly for La Vedova. Anyway, her family, of course, realized their own culpability in this. It was their misdeed, really, to cast her out and at the age of 15 and give her over to Garibaldi. So posthumously, they reconciled with her and had her preserved in the catacombs. They wanted justice brought against Garibaldi, but it was not going to happen. The police and the courts could not bring this man to justice for death of this girl. Why? The reason being that no one was going to testify against Garibaldi. See, in order for them